Cheeseheads. Get on your feet. It's Curd and Long. Hosted by Sparky, Fifer, and Ryan Horvath.
Welcome in another edition of Curd and Long. Steve Sparky, Fifer with you from 1250 a.m. The Fan, hosted Wisconsin Sports Daily, weekday afternoons from 2 to 5. Ryan Horvath out today, still sick, been sick all week long, so hopefully he feels better. My guy, the star of the podcast. When he comes on, numbers shoot through the roof. Paul Bretl joins us now. Follow him on Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it, at Paul_Bretl. He, of course, writes for Packers Wire. But otherwise, people may not know, you also are covering my other football team, the Indianapolis Colts. How is that journey going, and what's the name of that website?
Yeah, I always appreciate joining you, Sparky, and thank you for the kind words. And yeah, it's like Packers Wire, but it's Colts Wire under the USA Today umbrella, and it's been fun. It's been a fun opportunity to dive into a new team that, you know, beforehand, outside of the big names, I wasn't typically familiar with, you know, that team as a whole. And so it's been a really, really fun experience. And I'm super excited for the season to get going here because the Colts, at least on paper, they look like an ascending team. They look like they got a lot of the pieces of the puzzle there.
Don't let them suck you in.
Producing on Sundays is the next step, but it looks like a fun team.
No, you're getting suckered in. I apologize on behalf of everybody. You don't get suckered into this. Don't do it. I mean, look, that division is the Houston Texans and everybody else at this point. You know, Titans fans, because I host shows in Memphis, they want to tell me they're going to be better than I think. I think they're trash. I think they're going to be one of the worst teams in football. We'll see if I'm right on that. The Jacksonville Jaguars, it's Trevor Lawrence, and we'll see if that works out. And then the Colts, I have a hard time buying into a quarterback that I don't think can stay healthy. He didn't show it in college. He hasn't shown in the NFL in 1 year. He poo-poos the whole idea of sliding and getting out of bounds and thinks that's stupid and wants to run over dudes and lower his shoulder. So as long as Richardson plays like that, there's no hope going forward until he can prove he can finish a 17-game season and play all 17 games. I'm not buying it. Yes, he looked good when he was actually healthy, but I'm not there, Paul. I can't let myself go there. I can't.
That's the big piece of the puzzle for them. But I'll say this real quick. On both sides of the line, offense line, defense line, they have really, really good units. And as the old saying goes, if you can control a line of scrimmage, you can control the game.
Yep.
And I think they're going to be in a lot of games this season. And ultimately their ceiling is going to be determined by how well Richardson plays.
And that Jonathan Taylor doesn't fumble. That's another piece in this that drives me nuts. And he's got to also stay healthy. There's another injury concern there as well. All right, let's talk about the Packers. Even though I could do a Colts podcast with Paul, I've been trying to convince him to do a Colts podcast. Paul, all right, let's talk about the Packers. So you've been doing a preview series on the Packers. So what position groups are you through so far if people want to go back and check it out?
Yeah, so far I got the offensive side of the ball done. So quarterback, receiver, tight end, and then offensive line's coming out on Saturday. So we worked through that side of the football so far.
Okay, good. So I want to play on the offensive side of the football as well. And I want to talk about numbers and stats and improvement, or maybe steps back for certain guys, because not everybody, I don't think, can improve. 4,100 yards, 4,159 yards last year. Damn good for Jordan Love. And they sucked for half of the year. I mean, how many times they go 1, 2, 3 punt in first half of games there? A ton. They weren't moving the ball at all. And then, come out second half and now all of a sudden they play better and you feel better. But there was a lot of wasted halves, a lot of wasted possessions where, they were in and out. How much better from a yards perspective do you think Jordan Love can be? Because already that's a solid year.
Yeah, that's an extremely solid year. And like you said, and as we all saw, the first half of it roughly was touch and go there. A lot of struggles that came with it. So obviously the opportunity there is to improve upon that. It's certainly out there. It certainly exists, especially, yes, Love's going into his fifth season as the on the team in the NFL, but it's a second as a starter. And we often hear about that biggest jump comes from your second season of having that playing time experience. So that opportunity is there for him. And that extends to Jaden Reed, to Dontavian Wicks, his receivers going into their second season. And the big test for Love for me right now, as the early on in the season unfolds, is how is he going to do countering the counters? Defenses have had a full off season now to digest what he does well, what the offense does well, what they don't do well, and they're going to try to put them in those situations where they struggle. And for a team with Super Bowl aspirations, for a team that finished the year as strongly as they did last year, you can't have that, elongated learning curve anymore of 2, 3, 4 weeks, whatever it might end up being, to make those adjustments. Those adjustments have to be made on the fly now. And so for me, as we get into the early portion of the season, that's when that test is really going to come, obviously. And I think that's going to be a big one for him to have to answer.
4,159. I'll ask you again. How much better does he do? Does he get to 4,500? Does he get to 5,000 yards? How much better do you think he does this year, second year starting?
I'll go with the 4,500 mark. 5,000 seems, that's a heck of a season,
right?
So I'll go with the 45. I do think there's going to be improvement for all of the reasons mentioned. This offense as a whole, not just Jordan Love, but they are light years ahead of where they were this time a year ago. It was now, and they're still trying to figure out. And this even went into the season. All right, how do we best utilize Jaden Reed? How do we best utilize Luke Musgrave? They have those answers now, and so having the full off season, I do think that we're going to see that step forward. Not to say there's not going to be bumps, not going to be hiccups. That's just life in the NFL over the course of a season. But I do think we're going to see that progress from them.
First half of the season, completion percentage, not good. Struggled. Got better in the second half. Finished at 64%. How much better can that be?
I think that one's going to, if I had to guess, I would say that one's, I think that hangs in the ballpark. I don't see it decreasing substantially. I don't necessarily see it jumping up to 67, 68, 69% either. So I think he's going to be able to hang in that arena around that completion percentage. And tying into that, one of the big points of emphasis for him this offseason, and quarterbacks coach Tom Clements has talked about it, is his footwork. And no pun intended, but that's the foundation for the quarterback and their accuracy. If that part of it's off, and Tom Clements has said this, if he can usually tell how the pass is going to turn out just by watching the quarterback's footwork. And so that's been a big point of emphasis for him, and not just in the pocket, from a clean pocket, but how's his footwork when he's moving? How is it when he's outside of the pocket scrambling? And so that ties in really well to his completion percentage. But I think in general, it's going to hang in that same ballpark.
Let's talk about touchdowns and interceptions. 32 and 11. Again, awful first half. Threw some interceptions. I was never concerned about it, being a huge issue necessarily, even when he was throwing them there in the first half of the season. Throws one, in the second half when he gets on his unbelievable run. 32 touchdowns, again, having a horrible first half to go along with it. I don't think I'm changing the number, even though he only threw one in the second half. I don't think that's realistic. So I think he still probably hangs around 10 to 12 interceptions every year. Touchdown passes, confused. Don't know. I'm not quite sure how they're going to run the goal line stuff with having Josh Jacobs, keeping A.J. Dillon if he makes the roster. I don't know what that's going to look like. For Rodgers, he cherry-picked 1-yard touchdown pass here and that type of stuff. They got 2 tight ends that definitely could be red zone guys, obviously. They got a jump ball guy in Christian Watson. So they have options. I just don't know how much better 32 touchdowns gets. Your thoughts on both of those categories?
Yeah, I'm with you in both regards. I think the interceptions, in that 10 and 10 area seems like a fair number. And as far as touchdowns, I wouldn't be surprised if it's a little bit more. One, just the options that they have pass catching wise, obviously at receiver we know about, but the tight ends. And then Josh Jacobs is going to be a big factor in the passing game. I mean, he had 249 targets during his time with the Raiders. And he told Matt LaFleur one of the first things in their first conversations when he arrived in Green Bay was that he wanted to be a bigger part of the passing game. And that doesn't just mean getting more opportunities, but how he's utilized in that regard. He feels he has more to offer that. And we all know Matt LaFleur is the head coach. He likes to throw the ball around a little bit as well, if that's a possibility. So I still tend to think in those situations you're describing in the red zone, handing it off versus passing it in those situations, I still think there's going to be plenty of those opportunities there. So I wouldn't be surprised if Jordan Love does exceed those, that 32 touchdown mark that he had.
Talking with our guy, Paul Bretl, of course, Packers Wire. Let's shift over now to the running backs. We'll do that coming up next. Curd and Long, download it wherever you download your favorite podcast at. Download it on your Odyssey app. That should be your favorite app on your phone if we're talking. I mean, it's free. It's AUDACY. You can stream Wisconsin Sports Daily there. Go back to any shows or interviews you miss on 1250 AM The Fan, all available there as well. And of course, Curd and Long, the video portion of it, like this one is, you can check us out on the Odyssey Sports YouTube page. Back after this. Hey, it's Sparky Fifer, 1250 AM The Fan, Wisconsin Sports Daily, weekday afternoons, 2 to 5 on The Fan in Milwaukee. He is Paul Bretl, the star of Packers Wire. Follow him on Twitter at Paul_Bretl. Follow me at Sparky Radio. We did quarterback. We did Jordan Love. We did stats and numbers. I want to do the same now for the running back position. Now, you're probably saying, why are we doing all this? Well, if you're just checking out this segment, because we break them up into segments, if you're just checking out this segment, then you miss Paul telling you that he did a whole offensive preview, position group by position group, over at Packers Wire. So we're doing the same thing here, except I'm getting specifically into numbers and not all the other mumbo jumbo. But of course, Paul is going to give you all the mumbo jumbo around why the numbers are going to be what that Paul says. Then when the season is done, we'll revisit this video and see how accurate Paul and I are, because we're doing this in July before training camp even starts. So this is a long shot being right on this stuff. Aaron Jones last year had 142 carries, 656 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Does Josh Jacobs do better than that? And does Josh Jacobs end up with more attempts than that?
I think so. I think that Jacobs is going to exceed him in attempts and in total yardage. And I think a big part of that and what the Packers liked about Josh Jacobs when they signed him is his durability. And I know last year he missed a few games, but in Jacobs' career, that's been the outlier situation versus what we've seen from him. He's been someone that has shown that he can handle a heavy workload. And I still think the Packers are going to be mindful of how many opportunities they give him. But if it's a game where he has to get 20, 25 touches, if that's part of the game plan, if that's how the game's unfolding, I think we're going to see more of that flexibility from Matt LaFleur and giving Josh Jacobs that opportunity to do so. So I think the durability, his ability to stay on the field is going to be a big part of it. And in general, Jacobs just seems poised for that bounce back year. I think having the Packers offensive line that he's playing behind versus the Raiders is obviously going to be impactful. And Jordan Love, the passing game, the receivers, I think he's going to go against fewer, heavier boxes than what he did with the Raiders, because you can't just focus in on the run game, or you can't just focus in on the passing game against this Packers offense. So I think yards-wise, I think attempts-wise, he's going to exceed what Aaron Jones did last year.
Can we talk about the Raiders for a little bit? So Josh Jacobs goes off to Chris Long about the fact that, they lose a game. He's pissed off. He don't want to talk to anybody. And dudes are like, man, it's the NFL, man. Get over it. Let's move on. Come on, next week. And he was not taking that. He was not liking that. That video was going all over yesterday. So I went back and I looked. I found another video of his, even more pissed off than that one, at the end of the season with his jacket on in his locker, pretty much ripping the organization and saying he's sick of that crap and he's about had his fill of all this. Now, obviously, we talked about this on Wisconsin Sports Daily. When you come from an organization like Alabama, and I said organization, not college on purpose. When you come from there and you're competing for national championships and you're winning a majority of your games, and then you get put into a situation where you're losing and a locker room where a lot of these guys have been there while they've been losing and kind of are at the point of accepting losing, even though you have Max Crosby and Devontae Adams and now Josh Jacobs, it takes more than that to change an attitude. It takes more than that to change a culture. I just wonder how much different he'll be in a winning culture, in a winning locker room, as far as performance goes. I'm not saying a losing culture affects, if he's trying or whatever, but I'm sure it wears on you after a while. And you're probably more motivated when everybody's doing well around you and you don't want to be, the loose nut on the wheel or whatever you want to call it. So you want to, hold up your end of the bargain. Maybe he goes out and busts out and has some type of career year for this Packers team. Now he's surrounded by a bunch of winners that expect to win and expect to compete for a Super Bowl.
Yeah, in the opportunities that we've had to talk to Josh Jacobs this offseason, first immediately after you meet him, you can you can tell the high caliber person that he is, and the added presence that he'll bring to the locker room by being in there. But there's two big motivators for him. One, he was a captain during his time with the Raiders, and coming here to Green Bay in the offseason, he wants to be a leader on this young team, but he's very aware that it doesn't necessarily matter in the Packers locker room what he accomplished with the Raiders. His mindset is, I have to come in and show them the work that I put in to get to that point, to have the opportunity to earn that leadership role. So that's one thing that's on his radar during this time of the year. The other motivator for him, and he's talked about this, is, when he's looking at other players and determining, where they stand in the hierarchy of their position group, he looks at how do they perform in the biggest moments. And for him, I'm guessing some of that frustration that he may have felt previously is he hasn't had those opportunities. He's only been to one playoff game in his NFL career. So being here in Green Bay, having the opportunity to be a part of what hopefully becomes those big moments, those playoff games, I think is a huge, huge motivator for him, because obviously he's shown what he can do during the regular season. He's an NFL rushing leader just 2 years ago, but he wants to be able to showcase his talent in a playoff game when it matters most, when the game's on the line and the team's relying on him. How does he perform? So that is a massive, massive motivator for him coming into the season with the Packers, and him looking at the opportunity that's ahead with this team.
All right, let's look at receiving numbers now. Last year for Aaron Jones, because you brought up for Josh Jacobs, he wants to be more involved in the passing game. Aaron Jones last year, 43 targets, 30 catches, 233 yards, 1 touchdown. What numbers should we expect from one Josh Jacobs in comparison? Because in my mind, Aaron Jones caught the ball well, was dynamic in the open field. If they throw the ball more to him than they did Jones, I guess I would be surprised.
I think they're going to. And again, part of it is going back to the durability. I think the last couple of years with the Raiders, Jacobs has been in the 50, 60 targets per season range. So I wouldn't be surprised whatsoever if he finds himself in that ballpark again, with the Packers around that 50 mark. And again, a lot of it's going to be durability. If Aaron Jones was on the field for the full 17 games last season, he would have certainly exceeded those 43 opportunities that he had in the passing game. So again, Jacobs' durability is going to be a big part of it. And he's a natural pass catcher. Like, he has some route running abilities to his skill set. Now, I think part of the transition for him, and like I alluded to earlier, he said when he was telling LaFleur he wants to be utilized differently, most of his pass catching opportunities came out of the backfield. We've seen Aaron Jones out of the slot, even out wide occasionally. So I think from a transition standpoint, that's going to be where, that's going to be more new to Jacobs in terms of how he's utilized within the offense. But I think the opportunities are going to be there. He's dynamic in space, really good at making defenders miss, as we've seen. And so I think the opportunities are going to be there for him.
I think if you're a Packer fan and you're either watching this or you're listening to this, you're going, Paul, they got Jane Reed, Christian Watson, they got Dontavian Hicks, Romeo Dobbs, Malik Heath, Luke Musgrave, Tucker Kraft. What in the world do they got to be throwing a damn running back out of a slot or something like that when they got all these weapons for Jordan Love? Why does he have to be out there instead of a receiver or a tight end?
I think in the grand scheme of it all, it's the Matt LaFleur offense. That running back, whether they're getting the ball or not, being able to move around is an important element to it. We've heard, especially when Matt LaFleur took over, he used the term illusion of complexity, keeping defenses off balance and guessing, being able to run a variety of plays from a few formations, being able to have plays build off each other throughout the course of the game. So a play in quarter 4 looks similar to what you ran in quarter 2, but it ends up being completely different. And in order to accomplish that, you need versatility. You need to move guys around. It creates mismatches. And whether that's a mismatch that, Jacobs can exploit out of the backfield, or it creates a mismatch that Luke Musgrave can exploit over the middle, however it ends up unfolding, that overall is an important part of the offense. And as we've seen with Jordan Love, and this was, in the receiver preview that I did, this was a strength of this team last year. No, they didn't have a true number one, but to Jordan Love's credit, pretty much regardless of the situation, he went where the read dictated, where the defense dictated. He wasn't playing favorites. It's where does the ball need to go?
Wait a second. Are you saying another quarterback played favorites in Green Bay before? Are you saying that happened, Ball? What?
I'm just talking about Jordan Love. He did really well. at going wherever the read dictated. And so I think that too will help lead to opportunities for Josh Jacobs in the passing game. Again, he's not going to be the focal point. We all know that. But again, looking at what Aaron Jones's production was, he almost got to 50 targets last year with the time that he missed. I wouldn't be surprised if Jacobs is on a similar trajectory from a usage standpoint.
Here's my big question for this category of running backs. And we'll get to wide receivers and tight ends in the third segment. How's it going to play out between Marshawn Lloyd and A.J. Dillon? Because I am a huge proponent, and I know I'm on an island. I want A.J. Dillon to be a fullback. That's all I want A.J. Dillon to be. I want him to plow dudes over for Josh Jacobs. I want him to be the short handoff goal line guy with Jacobs behind him in the eye. That's what I want him to be. You know, we'll run out of the backfield from the fullback position, dump it off. That's fine. The tailback thing, as a third tailback, and his arms look bigger this year, he's just a beast. Like, I'd rather have Marshawn Lloyd being that guy, getting the other carries and so forth, the ability to make people miss, hit the home run with them. I love Marshawn Lloyd, in case you haven't figured this out. That's what I'd prefer if they're going to keep A.J. Dillon on the roster. How do you think it plays?
I think by the end of the season, I think Marshawn Lloyd's going to have more attempts than A.J. Dillon. I mean, in person, when we were at practice, rookie camp, OTAs, I mean, Matt LaFleur said he brings a different element to the office. His burst, his acceleration, Marshawn Lloyd is eye-popping. It's impressive. And Adam Stenovich said too, he said, you know, we want to get him involved as much as we can. So I don't think this is going to be an A.J. Dillon situation during his rookie year where he was behind Jamal Williams and Aaron Jones and was hardly utilized. Marshawn Lloyd, I expect, is going to have a decent role within this offense. And right now, I think A.J. Dillon's going to be on the team as well. You know, from a salary standpoint, he's certainly not a roster lock, but as I've written about before, you know, and he talked about it too. He's in the best shape of his life right now, and he looks leaner,
jacked,
but has still maintained that A.J. Dillon muscle mass that we all know about.
Yes.
But when you have someone who knows the offense as well as he does, and he needs to bring more juice, more burst to when he has the ball in his hands, you know, 3.4 yards per rush like last year isn't going to cut it long term, but he's reliable. You can trust him as a ball carrier, as a pass catcher, as a pass blocker. And there's value in that, especially if that's your third running back on the roster. So I think A.J. Dillon's going to be on the team, but you know, even by the halfway point of the season, and certainly by the end of it, I would expect Marshawn Lloyd to have more touches.
How do you think they use Marshawn Lloyd? I mean, we're talking about Josh Jacobs going out to be, you know, in a wide receiver role and so forth. Do you envision them playing both these backs in the backfield and then splitting one of them out or something along those lines? Because that's something that I love, the idea of Jones and Dillon in the backfield, split backs, let them figure out which way we're running or who's getting the ball or running, motioning them one out of the backfield. I love that concept and that look.
I think the pass catching element for the running backs, Jacobs and Lloyd specifically, I think most of it's going to be on Jacobs. You know, we look at Lloyd's opportunities coming out of college. He didn't have a ton in the passing game. You know, I think he had only 17 targets during his last season at USC. And as we learned with A.J. Dillon, that doesn't mean he can't do it, just means he wasn't asked to do it. But nonetheless, I expect there to be a bit of a transition for him, specifically when it comes to maybe the more intricate stuff, the type of routes he's asked to run, if they're going to move him to the slot. I feel like that's going to be more of a progression and something that might take a little time development for him before we see him fully being utilized in that role. Where he excelled was, again, because of that burst, that acceleration, is just out of the backfield, find a way to get him the ball in space, and then let Marshawn Lloyd do what Marshawn Lloyd does. And so I think that's where his opportunities are going to come from. But more the intricate stuff that we've seen Aaron Jones do, that we talked about with Josh Jacobs, I expect that more to be on his shoulders as Lloyd gets going here. And I even asked Lloyd following minicamp, I said, you know, you got these 5 weeks now before training camp. What are you focusing on? He said pass catching. He said that's what's got his attention right now. So I think that's going to be a bit of a learning curve for him.
As long as you work hard, man, who knows? We'll see how this whole thing plays out. He is Paul Bretl. He works hard. He's running on 2 teams. Follow him on Twitter at Paul_Bretl. You can follow me at Sparky Radio. Take a quick time out here on Kurt Along. Come back. We'll talk about the receivers and the tight ends. That is true. That is coming up next. Download Kurt Along on your favorite, wherever you download your favorite podcast ad, including the Odyssey app, AUDACY. Check us out on YouTube on the Odyssey Sports YouTube page. Hey, it's Sparky, Fifer, 1250 AM, The Fan, host of Wisconsin Sports Daily, weekday afternoons from 2 to 5 on The Fan in Milwaukee. He is Paul Bretl from Packers Wire. Follow him at Paul_Bretl. Follow me at Sparky Radio. We've done quarterbacks in the first segment. We did running back in the second segment. I shouldn't say quarterbacks. We didn't care about the other quarterbacks. We only talked about Jordan Love. Second segment, we did running backs. Now we're going to talk about wide receivers and tight ends. I want to start with the tight end group because I love the tight end group on this team. And I've compared them to Gonzalez and Gronk or Hernandez and Gronk. And everybody gets upset because I bring up Aaron Hernandez. Get over it. But this is kind of what it is. I think Kraft is a big physical type player like Gronk, but way more athletic than I think Matt LaFleur thought he was prior to the season. And he had to re-wrap his mind around what he really was. And Musgrave absolutely is athletic and can get down the field. How do you see these two playing out? Because I think last year, in LaFleur's mind, before the season started, when he didn't know any better, he was just going to use Kraft as that run blocker, short yardage type, throw 5 yards here, whatever. That's all that was going to be. And then Musgrave was going to be stretch the field guy down the middle. But I think Kraft changed his mind. Yeah,
100%. I mean, Tucker Kraft, with his ability that he showed with what he can do with the ball in his hands and in space. I mean, he displayed that a bit during his time at South Dakota State, but really, really impressed in that regard. And I think we're going to see a lot of those two on the field together. I mean, even though the Packers didn't necessarily have them together a ton last season, in the early going, they didn't really know what they had in Tucker Kraft, and then Luke Musgrave got hurt. So the opportunity to get Musgrave on the field with Tucker Kraft at who he was at the end of the year, they didn't have a ton of those opportunities, but still the Packers' second most utilized formation or personnel grouping last year was 2 tight ends. So that's just a key part of the Matt LaFleur offense already. And now when you have those two healthy, I think we're going to see that a ton. And when you have that element in the offense, I mean, again, talked about the illusion of complexity earlier, that just adds a whole new wrinkle. That opens up the playbook for Matt LaFleur in terms of what he can do, how he can disguise what the offense is doing for the defense. Because when you have a tight end who can impact the game as a blocker, who can impact the game as a pass catcher, pre-snap, it becomes a lot more harder for defenses to decipher what's going to happen. You can't necessarily know run or pass based on, all right, where they're lining up. And so that right off the bat adds an added wrinkle that the Packers can exploit. And again, there's the mismatch component of it, both what they bring because of their athleticism to the position, what they can do with the ball in their hands, and Luke Musgrave downfield. But again, that type of presence creates mismatches for others, the receivers, the running backs, to be able to exploit as well. So I expect those two on the field together to be something that we see regularly this season.
All right. Let's talk about the numbers that they had last year. And again, Musgrave obviously was hurt. Kraft played all 17. 40 targets, 31 catches, 355, and a couple of touchdowns for Kraft. Musgrave only played 11 games, 34 catches, or 46 targets, 34 catches, 352. So yards-wise, pretty much the same. 1 touchdown, even though Kraft played 6 more games. I have to think both of those numbers are larger, catches and yards probably.
I would think so too. I think the big question for all of us is how much, because you mentioned it earlier. You got all these receivers, you got these tight ends. We talked about Josh
Running
Jacobs.
backs.
Like there has to be the ceiling in terms of individual production, feels like it's going to be somewhat capped just because there's so many opportunities, so many options out there. But yeah, I think you're spot on that. I would expect both of them to exceed what they did last year.
So we're going to get to wide receivers. But if I said, all right, Paul, give me in order 1, 2, 3, best to third best, red zone options for Jordan Love, throwing the football. Who are your top 3 red zone options, first, second, third?
Ooh, wow, that's a great question.
I get one a podcast.
I'm going to go... And we're just focused on the receivers. You're putting me on the spot here, folks. I'm going to go with, I think I'm going to go with Dontavian Wicks as one.
Ooh.
His route running ability and just ability to create separation in what's already a confined space, like that's obviously already a really valuable trait that he has, that he can get open on his own. But when you're talking about the red zone where there's less space, less opportunities to move around, and that ability to create that extra step or two becomes so much more impactful. I think in that part of the field, that skill set that he has as a route runner is magnified in a good way. And again, becomes extremely valuable. So I'll put Dontavian Wicks at the top. Number 2 will go Christian Watson. I think just his ability, his skill set, his speed, just that in itself can create mismatches that he can exploit. So I'll put him at number 2.
And the jump ball factor you can use with him.
Exactly.
Yep.
And number 3, I'm so torn. Flip a coin here between Reed and Dobbs, but I'll go with Romeo Dobbs. And hold on. You're going Reed or Dobbs over either one of the tight ends? Oh, I thought this was the.
Oh, no. I said red zone options, throwing the football. That's all I said.
Yeah,
I didn't say anything else. So if you want to redo your list, go back up to 1. If you want to redo it with Musgrave and Kraft included now, go ahead.
I'll stick with Wicks at 1.
Okay.
I'll go with Tucker Kraft at number 2.
Ooh.
Reason I'll choose him over Luke Musgrave is I think from a skill set standpoint, blocking and pass catching, I think he's more well-rounded at this point. Doesn't mean he brings the same field stretching ability, but I think he's more well-rounded. When, like we talked about, when you have that element, I think there's that opportunity to really keep defenses off balance guessing. I think there's the opportunity for him to exploit that. And then I'll go with Christian Watson as the third, again, for the reasons mentioned.
Whoa.
But I'll say this. I don't think is there a bad trio you can put together for that?
Well, I'm telling you right now, I'm giving you a heads up. So if your Twitter blows up, I'm taking that clip that you just said, I'm cutting it out, and I'm playing it on the radio next week. And I'm asking everybody top 3 red zone options for the Packers. Name them 1 through 3. And I'm using you as a jump off because Tucker Kraft at 2, Tucker Kraft in the top 3, I never would have thought. I thought it was going to be Watson. Then I thought Wicks. And then I was debating Dobbs or maybe Musgrave. That's where my head was kind of at, because Jayden Reed is short and shifty, and okay, fine, I understand all that. But to me, I think, well, I mean, you could tell me, you watch film way more than I do, but I think Dobbs is a great route runner. So if part of the idea of getting separation with Wicks in the red zone, that's what makes him so valuable, Dobbs has to be kind of close, right? I mean, how would you, I'll get you another one now here. This is easier. Give me the top 3 route runners of what we're talking about here in the receiver crew. And forget the tight ends, just the receivers.
Yeah, Wicks and Dobbs are, I believe, at the top. And, before I was going to include the tight ends in that group, I was going to go with Dobbs at 3 for reasons you mentioned. Also, just looking back at last season, he was a favorite target of Jordan Love's in the red zone. And that reliability, that stability that Dobbs brought to that room was so important last year, because obviously Watson missed time. Wicks and Reed, went through the learning curve that comes with being a rookie. But his ability to be available on the field, and came up with some big situations for the Packers last year, not just in the red zone, but some 4th downs, some must-have 3rd downs. Dobbs was so crucial in that regard. So I'd put those 2 at the top. And then after that, I mean, take your pick, honestly. That's the beauty of what the Packers have right now.
All right, Paul Bretl. I got 2 more questions for you. Then 3 more questions, and then we'll call it a podcast. All right? This is just receivers, not tight ends. Okay? Who will lead this team in receptions in 2024? My vote, said it already on the radio, Romeo Dobbs.
I'm gonna go with Jayden Reed. I'm gonna go with Jayden Reed, because he was second last. He was second last year behind Dobbs, and I think that second year bump that we often talk about, and I think his ability in those short area with that speed, that juice that he has, I think, and there's a real rapport that him and Love develop. Not that Love doesn't have that with Dobbs, they obviously do, but I'm going to go with Jayden Reed, because again, I think he was close last year. I don't have the exact numbers. I know he was second behind Dobbs.
I've got the numbers.
I'm going
right
to take
here.
that bump.
Let's see. If we look at receptions last year, 64. He led the team in receptions last year. 64 for Jayden Reed, 59 for Romeo Dobbs.
Okay. Dobbs must have had more yards. Maybe that's what I'm thinking of. But I'll go with
yards. No, Jayden Reed 793, Romeo Dobbs 674.
Oh, there we go. All right. I'm going with
Touchdowns were the same.
I'm taking the easy way out, going with Reed.
This is my thing. Tell me if you think I'm crazy. I say Romeo Doubs is going to be like the Donald driver for this group. Am I nuts?
I don't think so.
All right, good. Yeah, good. Because I've been saying that too. I was like, he's not special. Like, he's not going into the Hall of Fame or nothing, but he's going to be a guy that always puts up good numbers every single year. It's going to be the quarterback's one of his favorite wide receivers. He's not scared to go across the middle and take a hit. He's a great route runner. I really like Romeo Doubs. He kind of became the forgotten man for most of the season, but I really like Doubs. Okay, let's move on. Who leads the team in yards? Now, last year, as I said, it was Reed at 793, then Doubs 674, then Wicks 581, then Watson, who only played 9 games, at 422. Who leads them in yards this year?
So I'm debating right now between Reed and Watson. Reed because, I picked him to have the most catches, so odds are yards are there. Watson, just because of the big play ability, may not have the receptions that Reed does, but there's the yards after the catch opportunity and just the big plays in general. But I'll go with Jaden Reed. And a big part of that is, it feels like the Packers feel really, really comfortable with where they're at with Christian Watson with the hamstring, and they feel that they're on a good path and what they need to do to keep him on the field. But that needs to be seen first, I think, before I would put Watson in that category.
I have a question. I just came up with another one. Sorry. I think you and others love Dontavian Wicks, think he might be maybe the most talented receiver they got. But you didn't pick him for receptions. You didn't pick him for yards. I can't imagine you're going to pick him for leading the wide receivers in touchdowns. So how does that happen? If he's that good, like everybody says, I think he's really good too. How does he get left out in this mix?
Well, I am going to pick him for touchdowns because I put him at number 1 for my red zone guy. So the opportunities will be there. But, that's the difficulty in what we're doing now too, because there's so many options. But Reed felt like as close to as what the Packers had last season, especially in those final games, as kind of a go-to. Play needs to be made. Where's the ball going to go? It felt like, and don't get me wrong, Wicks had those moments as well, but it felt like Reed had more of them. And so just doing our best to project what's going to happen this season, that's where I'm going in that regard. And the receptions part of it, ties in with the yards in terms of doing the most there. But I was going to pick Wicks for touchdowns.
There you go. So Wicks is his pick for touchdowns at this point. And I didn't pick anybody for touchdowns yet. I'm going to go Romeo Doubs for touchdowns, because I just think he's going to be his safety valve, like, constantly. There's going to be a lot of broken plays, and he's just going to find that little spot inside of a zone or break down the defense, and boop, there's 2 yards right there for him. Touchdown, find him a nice and easy cherry picking. Paul, I know you really didn't understand what the heck we were going to do when this whole thing started, but I hope you had some fun and made you sweat a little bit there in this segment.
Yeah, you definitely did.
He is Paul Bretl, the star, baby. Follow all his stuff at Packers Wire. Follow him on Twitter at Paul_Bretl. Follow me at Sparky Radio. Check me out weekday afternoons, 2 to 5. Wisconsin Sports Daily on 1250 AM The Fan. Download Kurt Long wherever you download your favorite podcast app, including your Odyssey app. And check us out on the YouTube page of Odyssey Sports for all the video content. Enjoy the rest of your day. Have a good one. Toodles.